Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 true disturbing stories from the West Virginia backwoods. These are tales of people who ventured into those ancient hollows and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The cabin my uncle left me sat about 40 minutes outside Braxton County, down a road that stopped being paved somewhere around the 15-minute mark. I'd only been there twice as a kid, both times in summer when the woods felt manageable, almost friendly. Uncle Morris had lived there alone for 30 years after his wife died, and when he passed, I was the only family member who'd return his calls, so I got the property. I was 29 and between jobs, which is why I convinced myself spending a weekend up there to assess the place was a good idea. The real estate agent I'd spoken to said the land alone was worth something, even if the cabin needed work. I drove up on a Friday in late October. The leaves were mostly down, and I remember thinking how you could see deeper into the woods than you could in summer, like the forest had undressed itself. The cabin was smaller than I remembered. Isn't that always the way? It had that particular smell old places get, wood smoke and dust, and something vaguely sweet that might have been rot. I'd brought supplies for 2 nights, sleeping bag, propane camp stove, flashlights, enough food. The electricity still worked, which surprised me. A single bulb in the main room, another in the bedroom. Uncle Morris had never bothered with much. I spent the first day just walking the property line, or trying to. He'd owned about 40 acres, most of it steep hillside tangled with laurel and fallen timber. There was a stream somewhere. I could hear it, but never quite found it that first day. The boundary markers were old surveyor's tape, faded to pale pink ribbons that hung limp from branches. That's when I started noticing the trees, not all of them, just certain ones, maybe a dozen scattered through the property. Someone had hammered nails into them, dozens of nails, driven in at chest height in rough circular patterns. The nails were old, rusted, their heads worn smooth. I touched one and it didn't budge. They'd been there long enough to become part of the bark. I tried to tell myself it was some old logging thing, some way of marking timber. My grandfather had worked in logging. Maybe it was a technique I didn't know about, but the circles bothered me. They were too deliberate, too even. I got back to the cabin around dusk. The sun drops fast in the hollows, and by the time I'd heated up some soup on the camp stove, it was full dark outside. That's when I realized how complete the darkness was out there. No streetlights, no neighboring houses, no distant highway glow, just the weak spill of light from the cabin windows and then nothing, like the woods had pulled a hood over everything. I was washing my bowl in the kitchen. Uncle Morris had a pump sink that still worked, when I heard the knocking. 3 deliberate knocks, wood on wood, coming from the back of the cabin. I stood there with my hands in the cold water, listening. Knocking came again, same rhythm, same spot. 3 measured strikes, then silence. I dried my hands and walked toward the bedroom. The sound had come from the back wall, I was sure of it. The bedroom was empty except for an old iron bed frame and a dresser Uncle Morris had left. I waited. Nothing. I just convinced myself it was the house settling or branch blown against the siding when the knocking came from a different wall. The north side this time. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, then quiet. My mouth went dry. I walked to the front window and looked out into the darkness. The porch light was on. I'd left it on, but it only reached maybe 15 feet before the night swallowed it. I couldn't see anything moving. The knocking started again. East wall, then south, then west. Always 3 knocks, always the same measured pace, moving around the cabin in a slow circle. Something was walking around the house, knocking as it went. Grabbed my flashlight and turned off the inside lights. I don't know why, some instinct that I didn't want to be visible, backlit against the windows. In the darkness, I moved to the front door and opened it slowly. The hinges creaked and the knocking stopped immediately. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight sweeping the yard. Nothing, just trees and darkness and my truck parked where I'd left it. The forest was completely silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. I waited there for maybe 5 minutes, cold soaking through my jacket, before I went back inside and locked the door. I checked every window latch twice. The knocking didn't start again that night, but I didn't sleep either. I sat in the main room with all my gear piled by the door, listening to silence so heavy it felt like pressure against my ears. When dawn finally came, gray and slow, I made coffee and tried to convince myself I'd overreacted. It could have been anything. Woodpecker maybe, or the house settling in the cold. I'd stay one more night, I decided. I'd driven all this way. The second day I spent cleaning out the cabin, packing up Uncle Morris's things into boxes. He didn't have much, some clothes, books, old tools in various states of rust. I found a journal in the bedroom dresser, but the handwriting was shaky and most of it was just notes about weather and when he'd last gone to town for supplies. The last entry was from 3 days before he died. It just said, "Counted 47 today, more than yesterday." I didn't know what that meant. Around 3 in the afternoon, I decided to try finding that stream again. I followed the sound downhill, pushing through mountain laurel that grabbed at my jacket. The stream was smaller than I expected, just a trickle really, running over mossy rocks. But there was something built there, a small stone cairn, about knee-high, sitting right in the middle of the water. I crouched down to look at it. The stones were stacked carefully, wedged tight, and at the very top, balanced on the highest stone, was a nail. One of those old rusted nails like the ones in the trees, standing upright. I reached out to touch it, and that's when I heard my name, Daniel. My mother's voice calling from up the hill, from the direction of the cabin. I stood up so fast I almost fell into the stream. "Mom," I called back, but my mother lived in Florida. She hadn't been to this property in decades. She wouldn't be here. "Daniel, come here." The voice was perfect. The exact tone she used when I was a kid and dinner was ready. Patient, a little tired. I felt my legs start to move toward it before my brain caught up. I stopped myself. My heart was hammering. "Who's there?" I shouted. The voice came again, same words, same tone, like a recording playing on repeat. "Daniel, come here." I backed away from the stream, keeping my eyes on the hillside above me. I couldn't see anything moving in the trees. Voice called again, and this time I realized it wasn't coming from one spot. It was coming from everywhere at once, surrounding me. I ran. I crashed through the laurel, branches whipping my face, my boots slipping on wet leaves. The voice kept calling, always just ahead of me, leading me in circles. I realized after the third time I passed the same fallen oak that I wasn't heading toward the cabin anymore. I was lost on my own uncle's property. I forced myself to stop and breathe, think. The stream ran downhill, which meant the cabin was uphill. I turned around and started climbing, ignoring the voice that kept calling my name in my dead mother's tone. She'd been dead for 6 years. When I finally broke through the trees into the clearing, the cabin was dark. I'd been gone longer than I thought. The sun was setting. I ran to the front door and found it standing open. I'd locked it. I knew I'd locked it. Inside, everything was wrong. The boxes I'd packed were scattered across the floor, contents spilled everywhere. The furniture had been moved, dragged, by the looks of the scratch marks on the floor. The bed frame from the bedroom was now in the main room, positioned in the center like someone had been trying to make a specific arrangement. And on every wall, at exact chest height, someone had driven nails into the wood. Dozens of them, in those same careful circles. I didn't pack. I didn't close the door. I got in my truck and drove, and I didn't stop until I hit the highway. 3 hours later, when I was nearly home, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over. I sold the property through a lawyer, never went back. The buyer got a hell of a deal because I priced it to move fast. Sometimes, I wonder what they found there, if they noticed the nails, if they heard the knocking. Mostly, I try not to think about it at all. But last month, I was cleaning out my truck and found a nail in the bed, rusted and old, wedged between the wheel well and the frame. I don't know how it got there. I threw it away, but I keep thinking about Uncle Morris's journal. Counted 47 today. I never counted how many nails I saw. I wish I had, or maybe I'm glad I didn't. Story 2. My cousin Becca and I decided to hike the Seneca Creek Trail on a Thursday in March because we both had the day off and we were tired of being cooped up all winter. Neither of us had ever been that far into Monongahela National Forest, but the trailhead wasn't hard to find and the weather was supposed to be clear. Mid-40s, decent for that time of year. We started around 9 in the morning. Becca had hiked more than I had. She was one of those people who actually used her gym membership and owned proper boots. I was wearing sneakers I'd bought 2 years ago and hadn't broken in yet. About an hour in, I was already regretting it, but I wasn't about to admit that to her. The trail followed a ridge line for the first few miles, then dropped down into a valley so steep we had to dig our heels in to keep from sliding. The trees down there were different, older, thicker, with bark that looked almost black. Becca kept stopping to take pictures, and I remember being annoyed because I wanted to keep moving, wanted to stay warm. We'd been hiking maybe 3 hours when we saw the house. It wasn't on any map. We'd checked before we left. The trail was supposed to run through pure wilderness for another 6 miles before looping back. But there it was, sitting in a small clearing about 50 yards off the path. A 2-story farmhouse with a sagging porch and windows that caught the light in a way that made them look like they were watching us. "Should we check it out?" Becca asked. She had that tone she always got when she was excited about something, like she'd already decided and was just pretending to ask my opinion. I didn't want to. Something about the house made my skin crawl. But I said okay, because that's what you do with your cousin, right? You go along with things. We pushed through the underbrush to get closer. The house was old, you could tell by the foundation stones and the hand-split shingles on the roof. Someone had built it a long time ago, probably back when these mountains were still being logged. The porch steps were half rotted through, and the front door hung open about 6 inches. "Hello?" Becca called out. "Anyone home?" No answer, just the sound of wind moving through the empty windows upstairs. We went inside. The first floor was mostly bare. A few pieces of broken furniture, newspapers on the floor so old they crumbled when you stepped on them. The dates I could make out were from the 1970s. The air smelled like mildew and something else, something sharp and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. There was a staircase along the back wall. Becca started up it before I could stop her, testing each step before putting her full weight down. I followed because the alternative was staying alone in that front room, and that felt worse. The second floor had 4 small bedrooms, all empty except for debris, broken glass, bits of plaster, animal droppings. The windows up there were intact though, which seemed odd, like someone had replaced them more recently than the house had been abandoned. We were in the last bedroom, the one that faced north into deeper forest, when Becca grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered. Through the window, I could see a path. Not a trail, a path worn smooth through the trees, leading from the back of the house into the woods. And walking along that path, moving toward the house, was a figure. It was too far away to see clearly, just a shape between the trees, pale and thin, moving with a strange, swaying gait. My first thought was that it was a person, maybe someone who lived nearby, but the way it moved was wrong. Its arms swung too loosely, and its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn. "We need to go," I said. Becca didn't argue. We went down those stairs faster than was safe, and I heard one of the steps crack under my weight, but I didn't stop. We burst out the front door and ran for the trail, branches whipping at us, my lungs burning. We didn't slow down until we'd put maybe a mile between us and that house. When we finally stopped, bent over and gasping, Becca looked back the way we'd come. "Did you see its face?" she asked. I hadn't. I'd been too focused on running. "No, did you?" She shook her head, but she looked pale. I don't think it had one. We hiked out in record time, barely speaking. When we got back to the parking area, there was a Ranger truck parked next to Becca's car. The Ranger, his name tag said Wilcox, was waiting for us. "You two okay?" he asked. "You look like you've been running." Becca told him about the house. He listened with his arms crossed, his expression neutral, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "There's no house on that trail," he said finally. "I've been working this section for 8 years. There's no structure within 5 miles of Seneca Creek." "We saw it," I insisted. 2-story farmhouse, white paint, sagging porch. He looked at us both, then sighed. "Sometimes people see things in these woods. The light plays tricks, especially when you're tired. Or maybe it was an old hunting cabin someone built illegally. Either way, I'll have someone check it out." Left it at that. What else could we say? 3 days later, Becca called me. The Ranger had contacted her. They'd searched the area we described. They'd gone 2 miles in every direction from where we said we saw the house. They didn't find anything. No house, no foundation, no clearing, just forest. But they did find the path, that worn, smooth path leading between the trees. They followed it for half a mile before it just ended, like whoever made it had stopped walking mid-step and disappeared. Becca asked the Ranger what he thought made the paths. He didn't answer her question. He just suggested we maybe try hiking in a different part of the forest next time. I looked at the photos Becca took that day, the ones she snapped before we saw the house. In the background of one of them, barely visible through the trees, there's something pale standing between 2 trunks. It's out of focus, and it could be anything, a birch tree, a trick of the light, but it looks like it's watching the camera. I deleted the photo from my phone, but Becca still has it. She says she keeps looking at it, trying to see more detail. She's talked about going back, finding that trail again. I told her if she does, she's going alone. Story 3. I took a job with a surveying company the summer I turned 24 because the pay was decent and I needed money for grad school. The work was straightforward: follow the crew chief, hold the rod, mark points, try not to get poison ivy. Most of it was subdivisions and new construction sites around Charleston. Boring but easy. Then in late July, we got a contract for a property boundary survey way out in Webster County, near a place called Backwoods. The landowner, some guy named Strickland who lived in Pennsylvania, wanted to sell his property, but the deed description was from the 1920s and nobody could figure out where the actual boundaries were anymore. Our crew chief was a guy named Marcus Webb, and he'd been surveying for 30 years. He looked at the old maps and shook his head. "This is going to be a bushwhack," he said. "No trails, steep terrain, probably take us 3 days minimum." There were 4 of us: Marcus, me, a guy named Tyler who ran the total station, and a woman named Anna who did the GPS work. We drove out on a Monday, parked at the end of a gravel road that looked like it hadn't been maintained in a decade, and started hiking in. The property was 200 acres of steep mountainside covered in second-growth timber. We spent the first day just trying to find the original survey markers, iron pins that had been driven into the ground nearly a century ago. We found 2 of them by late afternoon, both buried under 3 inches of forest duff. We camped that night in a relatively flat spot about halfway up the mountain. Marcus had done this kind of work before and came prepared: proper tents, cooking gear, bare canisters for food storage. I'd never backpacked before, and I remember being surprised by how heavy everything was, how tired I felt by the time we stopped. It got dark faster than I expected. Marcus built a small fire. He said it was okay, we were far enough from any dry areas, and we sat around it eating dehydrated meals that tasted better than they had any right to. Anna told stories about other surveys she'd worked on, places where the property owners swore the boundaries were in completely different spots than the legal descriptions showed. Around 10, we heard the singing. It was distant at first, coming from somewhere uphill. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing something without words, just melody rising and falling. It sounded almost like a lullaby. "Someone else out here?" Tyler asked, looking at Marcus. Marcus frowned. "Shouldn't be. This is private property, and we are miles from any access point except the one we used." The singing continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly mid-phrase. We sat in silence, listening, but it didn't start again. "Probably just sound carrying weird in the mountains," Anna said, but she didn't sound convinced. We went to our tents around 11. Marcus and Tyler shared one, Anna had her own, and I had a cheap 2-person tent I'd borrowed from my brother. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the forest and thinking about that singing. There was something off about it, something that bothered me, but I couldn't figure out what. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up suddenly to someone unzipping my tent. The sound was unmistakable, the plastic zipper rasp, moving slowly from bottom to top. I opened my eyes and saw the tent flap falling open, moonlight spilling in. And standing in the opening, silhouetted against the night sky, was a woman. She was barefoot and wearing what looked like a long dress or nightgown. Her hair hung down past her shoulders. She didn't move, just stood there looking into the tent. Looking at me, I couldn't move. I was frozen, my brain screaming at me to do something but my body refusing to respond. The woman tilted her head slowly to one side, and in the moonlight I saw her face was wrong. The proportions were off somehow, eyes too far apart, mouth too wide, like someone had stretched a photograph. Then she smiled, and her mouth opened wider than any mouth should open, and she started to lean down toward me. I found my voice and screamed. The woman jerked back, and suddenly Marcus was there, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "What happened? What's wrong?" I scrambled out of the tent, falling over my sleeping bag. There was someone here, a woman. She opened my tent. Marcus swept his flashlight around the campsite. The beam caught our other tents, the dead fire, the trees beyond, nothing else. No woman, no movement. "You sure it wasn't a dream?" Tyler asked. He and Anna had emerged from their tents, both looking half asleep and confused. "I saw her," I insisted. She unzipped my tent and stood there looking at me. Anna walked over and examined the tent. "The zipper's definitely open," she said. "All the way, but Daniel, you could have opened it yourself while you were sleeping." Wanted to argue, but what could I say? I'd seen something, but there was no evidence it had been real. Marcus suggested I move my sleeping bag into their tent for the rest of the night, and I did, even though I felt like a child afraid of the dark. I didn't sleep again. I lay there listening to Marcus and Tyler breathing, watching the tent walls lighten gradually as dawn approached, and thinking about that smile. The next day we found something that made me wish we'd packed up and left right then. We were working our way along what should have been the northern property boundary, hacking through mountain laurel with machetes, when Anna stopped suddenly. "Hey," she said, "come look at this." We gathered around where she was standing. There in a small open space between the trees were footprints in the soft earth. Bare footprints, small and narrow, a woman's feet. They led from the direction of our campsite, circled around the spot where Anna stood, then headed uphill toward a rocky outcrop. "Those weren't there yesterday," Marcus said quietly. "We walked through this exact area." We followed the prints. They led up through the rocks to a narrow opening, not quite a cave, more like a gap between two massive boulders. The opening was maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. Dark inside. Marcus shone his flashlight in. The light reached back maybe 10 feet before hitting what looked like a solid rock wall. The space was empty except for one thing. Scratched into the rock face at the back, deep grooves in the stone, were words. "She comes when you sleep." "We are done," Marcus said. His voice was flat, final. "Pack up, we're leaving." "But we haven't finished the survey," Tyler protested. "We've barely found half the boundary markers." "I don't care, we're leaving." I'd never heard Marcus sound scared before, but he was scared then. We all were. We hiked out faster than we'd hiked in, barely stopping to rest. I kept feeling like something was behind us, just out of sight, matching our pace. Every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. We reached the truck around 2 in the afternoon. As we were loading our gear, I noticed something and my blood went cold. There was dirt on the truck's hood. Fresh dirt in a pattern. It took me a moment to recognize what I was seeing. A handprint, small and narrow, a woman's hand. We de-locked the truck. The alarm hadn't gone off, but something had touched it while we were gone. Marcus called the client that evening and told him we couldn't complete the survey. He didn't give details, just said the terrain was too difficult and the boundary markers were too degraded. He recommended hiring someone else. The client was pissed, threatened to sue us for breach of contract. I don't know what Marcus told him. I'd already quit by then. I went back to waiting tables and gave up on grad school. About 2 months later, I saw a news story that made my hands start shaking. They'd found a woman's remains in Webster County, up near Burbu. Skeletal remains in a ravine, partially covered by rockfall. The county coroner estimated she'd been dead for approximately 40 years. The article mentioned she was found wearing the remains of a dress and that she'd been barefoot. I tried to find more information, but there was nothing. The story ran once and then disappeared. I've looked for it since, tried searching online, checked newspaper archives. It's like it never existed. But I still have the photo Anna took of those footprints before we left. I look at it sometimes late at night when I can't sleep. The prints are clear in the image. Toes and heel and arch perfectly preserved in the dirt. And in the background, if you look carefully at the shadows between the trees, there's something standing there watching us take the picture. Something with a dress hanging past its knees and hair past its shoulders. Something that's smiling. Story 4. My brother Evan and I inherited our grandfather's hunting cabin when he died in 2019. Neither of us had been up there in years. Evan lived in Richmond, I was in Columbus, and the cabin was deep in the Monongahela, accessible only by a logging road that was more mud than gravel half the year. We decided to spend a weekend there in November, partly to check on the property and partly because we both needed to get away from our lives for a bit. Evan was going through a divorce, I'd just lost my job, and something about the idea of being in the woods with no cell service sounded good. We drove up on a Saturday morning, Evan's truck loaded with supplies and enough beer to last us significantly longer than 2 days. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, just one room really, with a sleeping loft and a wood stove. Grandfather had built it himself in the 60s, and it still smelled like wood smoke and gun oil. "Place hasn't changed," Evan said, dropping his duffel on the floor. "Even the same calendar on the wall." He was right. The calendar was from 1997, still open to October, the pages yellowed and curling at the edges. We spent the first day like you'd expect, drinking beer, walking the property, shooting at targets with the rifles grandfather had left us. It felt good, uncomplicated. That night we cooked steaks on the wood stove and stayed up late, the kind of comfortable quiet you can only have with family. Around midnight, we heard something on the roof. Not like an animal scrambling around, like footsteps, slow, deliberate steps walking from one end of the cabin to the other. Evan and I looked at each other. "Bear," he suggested, but he didn't sound sure. The steps continued, back and forth, always the same pace. Then they stopped directly above where we sat. We waited. 5 seconds, 10. Then something started scratching on the roof right above our heads. Long scraping sounds, like fingernails on wood, moving in circles. "Okay, that's not a bear," I said. Evan grabbed one of the rifles and went to the door. I followed him out onto the small porch. We both aimed our flashlights up at the roof. Nothing. The roof was empty, just weathered shingles and pine needles. But the scratching started again, now coming from the back of the cabin. We ran around the corner, lights swinging wildly, still nothing. We searched the entire perimeter of the cabin, checking every angle. There was nothing on the roof, nothing in the trees nearby, no tracks in the dirt around the foundation. But the scratching continued, moving around the cabin like something was circling it. We went back inside and locked the door. The scratching kept going for another hour, sometimes on the roof, sometimes on the walls, sometimes so loud it sounded like whatever was making it was about to tear through. Then around 2 in the morning, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "Maybe we should leave," I said. "And go where?" Evan asked. "It's a 2-hour drive to the nearest town, and I've been drinking. We're stuck here until morning." He was right, we were stuck. We didn't sleep. We sat in that cabin with the rifles across our laps, waiting for dawn. Evan kept checking his phone even though there was no signal, and I watched the windows, expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. When sunrise finally came, gray and cold, we packed up fast. But as we were loading the truck, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were scratches on the cabin walls. Fresh scratches, deep gouges in the wood that definitely hadn't been there the day before. But they weren't random, they formed patterns, shapes, and the more I looked at them, the more they looked like words. Crude letters carved into the wood, "Get out." "Jesus Christ," Evan whispered. He was staring at the other side of the cabin, where more scratches spelled out, "Not your place." We got in the truck and drove. Neither of us spoke for the first hour. Finally, Evan broke the silence. "Grandfather told me a story once," he said, "about why he stopped hunting up there in the 80s. He said he'd been in the cabin one night and heard scratching on the door. When he opened it, there was a boy standing there, maybe 8 years old, barefoot, covered in dirt. The kid didn't say anything, just stared at him. Grandfather asked if he was lost, if he needed help. The boy smiled, and grandfather said his teeth were all wrong, filed to points, like something an animal would have. He slammed the door, and when he opened it again a minute later, the boy was gone." "Why didn't you tell me this before we came here?" I asked. "Because I thought it was just a story, something to scare me." "I didn't think," he stopped. "There's something else. Grandfather told me he did some research, looked into who'd lived on this land before he bought it. Turns out there was a family here in the 1930s, parents and 3 kids. They disappeared one winter. No bodies, no explanation, just gone. We never went back. Evan wanted to sell the property, but we couldn't find a buyer. The real estate agent said people in the area knew about that cabin, knew it had a reputation. She wouldn't say for what. Last year, the cabin burned down. The fire department said it was probably electrical, even though there was no electricity running to the building. They found something in the ashes though, human bones, small ones, children's bones. 3 sets of remains, so old they crumbled when they tried to move them. The county sent investigators, but they couldn't explain how the bones got there or who they belonged to. The remains were too degraded for DNA testing. They buried them in the county cemetery under a marker that just says, "Unknown Children, 1930s. I've thought about going to see it, but I can't bring myself to make the drive. Sometimes I still hear that scratching sound in my sleep. Always the same pattern, going in circles. And I wake up with my mouth dry and my heart pounding, and I check the walls of my apartment for marks that shouldn't be there. I haven't found any yet, but that yet is what keeps me up at night. Story 5. I was working for a tree removal service the year I turned 32, and in late September we got a call about a property near Richwood that needed clearing. The owner, a woman named Patricia Crowley, wanted several large oaks taken down before winter. She said they were too close to her house, and she worried about storm damage. It should have been a straightforward job. 3 days, 4 people, standard equipment. I was the crew lead, which meant I spent most of my time on the ground directing the climbers and running the chipper. The other guys were seasoned, Jake and Ramon on the saws, a kid named Colin who'd just gotten certified on the bucket truck. We showed up on a Tuesday morning. The property was about 15 acres, most of it wooded, with a small ranch house at the end of a long driveway. Patricia met us at the house. She was maybe 60, thin, with the kind of weathered skin you get from spending too much time outside. "The trees are around back," she said, barely making eye contact. "I'll be inside while you work. Don't come to the house unless there's an emergency." That struck me as odd, but clients were sometimes like that, didn't want to watch, didn't want to interact. We got our gear and walked around to the back of the property. The trees she wanted removed were massive. White oaks, probably 150 years old, forming a rough circle around a bare patch of ground maybe 40 feet across. Nothing grew in that circle, no grass, no weeds, nothing, just hard-packed dirt. "Weird," Ramon said, prodding the ground with his boot. "Ground is compacted like concrete." We set up and got to work. Jake climbed the first tree and started cutting branches, letting them fall to the ground where Colin and I cut them into manageable pieces and fed them to the chipper. Standard procedure. We'd done this hundreds of times. Around noon, Jake called down from about 50 feet up. "Hey, there's something carved into the trunk up here." "What kind of something?" I asked. "Writing, I think, but it's weird, hold on." He took a picture with his phone and climbed down to show us. The carving was deep, old, the bark grown around it in places. The letters were crude but readable. "Stay inside the circle or it will find you." "The hell does that mean?" Colin asked. I didn't know. Could be old. Teenagers messing around, probably. But I was thinking about that bare circle of ground and how nothing grew there. We worked through the afternoon. By 4 o'clock we'd taken down 2 of the trees and were starting on the 3rd. I was on the ground cutting branches when I noticed something. The shadows were wrong. It took me a minute to realize what I was seeing. The sun was still high enough that shadows should have been short, angled to the east. But there was a shadow extending from the circle of bare ground, stretching toward the woods, that was too long. Way too long. And it was moving, not moving like shadows move when the sun shifts, moving like something alive. I watched it slide across the ground, rippling slightly, and then it reached the tree line and disappeared into the forest. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked. Ramon nodded slowly. "Yeah, I saw it." Colin looked pale. "We should finish up and get out of here." We worked faster. Jake was back up in the 3rd tree, his chainsaw howling when he shouted, "Something's coming." I looked where he was pointing, toward the woods, and I saw it. It moved between the trees, too far away to make out details, but I could tell it was big. Bigger than a person, moving on 4 legs, but with something wrong about its proportions. Its back was too high, its neck too long, and it was coming toward us. "Get down," I yelled at Jake. "Now." He didn't argue. He rappelled down faster than I've ever seen anyone move, barely using the rope, practically falling the last 20 feet. We ran for the truck, leaving the equipment where it was. Patricia was standing on her porch when we came tearing around the house. She looked at us, at our faces, and her expression didn't change. "You saw it," she said, not a question. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. "I told you not to leave the circle," she said quietly. "The trees mark a boundary. They keep it out, or they did until you started cutting them down. You knew something was out there, and you sent us anyway." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I thought if you worked fast enough, if you stayed inside the circle, I need those trees gone. I can't live here anymore with them standing. They remind me," she stopped. "My husband built this house 40 years ago. He planted those trees in that exact pattern because the old farmer who owned this land before us told him it was important. Said the circle had to stay closed. My husband thought he was crazy. "What happened to your husband?" Ramon asked. Patricia looked at the woods. "He went out there one night 3 years ago, said he heard something calling his name. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. They found his body a week later, 5 miles into the forest. The coroner said he'd been running when he died. His heart gave out." We stood there in silence. From the woods came a sound, low and rolling, like rocks tumbling down a hill, but also like breathing. "You need to finish the job," Patricia said. "If you leave now, with the circle broken, it will come closer. It will reach the house." I wanted to leave. Every instinct I had was screaming to get in the truck and drive away. But I thought about what she'd said, about her husband, about that thing in the woods. "We need more guys," I said finally, "more equipment, and we work fast." We called the office and got 2 more crews out there. 6 additional people, 2 more trucks, extra lights. We worked through the night, taking down the remaining trees as quickly as we could, all of us staying inside that circle of bare ground. And the whole time we worked, we could hear it out there in the darkness beyond our lights, circling, breathing, waiting. We finished around 3 in the morning. The last tree fell with a crash that echoed off the hills, and suddenly the night went completely silent. The circle was gone, just stumps and sawdust now. We packed up fast and left. Patricia paid us double our normal rate, cash, and made us promise not to talk about what we'd seen. I kept that promise for 2 years. Then last month, I saw an article in the local paper. Patricia Crowley's house had been found empty. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. Just empty, like she'd walked out one day and never came back. They found tracks leading from her back door into the woods. Bare footprints, Patricia's size. They followed them for about 200 yards before they just stopped, mid-step, like she'd been lifted into the air. They're still searching. They probably always will be. I think about that circle of bare ground sometimes where nothing would grow. I think about those trees standing for 150 years, planted in that exact pattern for a reason. And I think about what Patricia said. The circle had to stay closed. We opened it, and something got in. Story 6. The first time I heard about the Whispering Hollow, I was 12 years old, and my Aunt Diane was trying to scare me. We were sitting on her porch outside Sutton, and she told me about a valley about 3 miles from her house where the air felt wrong and nobody went anymore. "You'll know it when you're near it," she said. "You'll hear whispering, even when the wind's not blowing. That's why they call it that." I didn't believe her then. I thought it was just one of those local legends every small town has, something to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. I didn't think about it again until I was 27 and back in West Virginia for her funeral. After the service, I stayed at her house for a few days, sorting through her things, trying to decide what to keep and what to donate. She lived alone for 15 years after her husband died, and the house was full of accumulated decades, old furniture, boxes of photographs, books she'd never gotten around to reading. On the 3rd day, I found her journals. She'd kept them sporadically, entries scattered across years with long gaps between. Most of it was mundane, whether observations, notes about her garden, complaints about her arthritis. But there was one entry from about 6 months before she died that made me stop. It was dated March 15th, and it read, "I went to the hollow today, first time in 40 years. I had to know if it was still there. It is. God help me, it's still there, and it knows I came. I heard my name, I heard Robert's voice. I didn't answer, I didn't go closer, but it knows I was there." Robert was her husband. He'd died in 1987. I spent the next hour searching through the journals, looking for more references to the hollow. There were a few scattered entries, most from decades ago, all of them vague, but one from 1986 caught my attention. "Robert has been going to the hollow. He won't tell me why. He comes back with dirt under his fingernails and leaves in his hair, and he won't meet my eyes. I'm afraid he's going to do something terrible." 6 months later, according to family stories I'd heard growing up, Robert walked out into the woods one evening and shot himself. They found his body the next morning. I should have left it alone. I should have finished sorting through the house, gone back to my life in Pittsburgh, and forgot about all of it. Instead, I decided to find the hollow. I didn't have a map, just my aunt's description from when I was 12 and a vague sense of direction. I started walking into the woods behind her property around 2 in the afternoon, figuring I had maybe 4 hours of daylight to explore and get back. The forest was thick with mountain laurel and rhododendron, the kind of understory that makes walking difficult. I pushed through, keeping roughly southwest, climbing over fallen logs and ducking under low branches. After about 40 minutes, I started hearing it, whispering. At first I thought it was wind through the leaves, but the air was still. The sound was coming from ahead of me, low and constant, like dozens of voices talking at once, but too quiet to make out words. I kept going. The whispering got louder. I came out into a valley, the hollow, I was sure of it. It was bowl-shaped, maybe 200 yards across, ringed by hills on all sides. The trees there were dead. Not dying, but dead, standing gray and bare like they'd been dead for years. And the ground was covered in fallen leaves so thick they came up past my ankles. The whispering was everywhere. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to rise from the ground itself, surrounding me. I should have turned back then. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, but I heard something in that whisper that made me freeze. My name. Not loud, not clear, just a suggestion of sound that might have been David, spoken by someone very far away. I took a step forward. The leaves crunched under my feet, and the whispering stopped instantly. The silence was total. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just my own breathing and the hammering of my heart. Then something else crunched through the leaves. Something moving toward me from the far side of the hollow, hidden behind the dead trees. I couldn't see it clearly, just glimpses between the trunks. Something pale and hunched, moving on legs that bent the wrong way. It moved in short bursts, freezing between steps, and each time it moved, it got closer. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. The thing stopped moving when I stopped, started again when I moved. It was matching my pace. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard it crash through the undergrowth, no longer trying to be quiet. It was fast, faster than me. I could hear it gaining, its breathing wet and ragged, and then I heard something else. David, wait. My aunt's voice, exactly her tone, her inflection, like she was calling me in for dinner when I was a kid. I didn't stop. I crashed through the laurel branches, tearing at my clothes and face, my lungs burning. I ran until I burst out of the woods into my aunt's backyard, and only then did I look back. Nothing. The forest was still and quiet. I went inside, locked every door and window, and sat in the kitchen with the lights on until morning. I didn't sleep. When dawn came, I went back outside to look at where I'd emerged from the woods. My footprints were clear in the soft ground, leading from the tree line to the house. And right behind them, pressed into the earth, were other prints. Not shoes, bare feet, but wrong. The toes were too long, splayed too wide, and there were too many of them. 5 or 6 on each foot, maybe more. The trail of strange prints followed my footprints exactly, step for step, right up to the back porch. Then they stopped, like whatever made them had stood there looking at the door. I left that same day. I called a realtor from the road and told them to sell the house as is. I didn't care about the price. I just wanted it gone. The house sold 3 months later to a couple from out of state. I thought about warning them, but what would I say? Last week I got a call from the realtor. The new owners had some questions about the property. Specifically, they wanted to know why there was a worn path leading from the backyard into the woods, and why they kept hearing whispering at night. I told her I didn't know. I hung up and blocked the number, but I've been having dreams about the hollow. In them, I'm walking through those dead trees, and the whispering forms words I can almost understand. My aunt is there, and my uncle Robert, and they're telling me something important. In the dreams, I always get close enough to hear what they're saying. Then I wake up. I haven't gone back to West Virginia. I don't think I ever will, but sometimes, late at night when everything's quiet, I hear whispering, and I'm starting to understand what it's saying. Story 7. My job with the Forest Service involved maintaining remote fire watch towers, which meant I spent a lot of time alone in the woods. Most people don't realize how many of these towers still exist, scattered through national forests, often miles from any road, some of them staffed seasonally, and some just left to rot. In October of 2018, I was assigned to check on a tower in the Cranberry Wilderness, about an hour south of Marlinton. The tower hadn't been staffed in 20 years, but records showed it was still structurally sound, and the service wanted to know if it was worth maintaining or if they should dismantle it. The hike-in was brutal, 6 miles on an old trail that had been partially reclaimed by the forest. I carried everything I'd need for 2 nights: camping gear, food, tools for assessing the tower, camera for documentation. My pack weighed about 50 pounds, and I felt every ounce of it by the time the tower came into view. The 70 feet tall steel frame construction with a small cabin at the top. The stairs were intact, though they groaned under my weight as I climbed. The cabin was exactly what I expected, one room maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with windows on all sides. There was an old desk, a chair bolted to the floor, and an Osborne firefinder that looked like it was from the 1950s. I spent the first afternoon taking measurements, checking for rust and structural damage, photographing everything. The tower was in better shape than I'd expected. Someone had maintained it, at least partially, more recently than 20 years ago. There were fresh scratches on the floor, like furniture had been moved recently, and the windows had been cleaned. I could tell because the glass on the inside was clearer than the outside. I made notes of this in my report, but didn't think much of it. Hikers sometimes used abandoned towers as emergency shelters. It happened. I set up my tent at the base of the tower and made dinner as the sun set. From the ground, I could see the cabin at the top silhouetted against the darkening sky, its windows reflecting the last light. Around 9 o'clock, I saw a light in the cabin. Just for a second, a flicker in one of the windows like someone had passed by with a flashlight. Then it was gone. I stood there staring up at the tower, my heart rate increasing. I'd locked the cabin when I came down. I was certain of it. And there was no one else out here. I'd seen no other cars at the trailhead, no signs of other campers. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the stairs. The door was still locked. I unlocked it and went inside, sweeping my light around the small space. Empty, everything exactly as I'd left it. But it was cold in there, not just cool cold like a freezer. My breath fogged in the air, and there was a smell, faint but distinct smoke, like a wood fire had been burning recently. I checked every corner, looked under the desk, examined the windows. Nothing, no explanation for the light I'd seen or the temperature drop. I went back down and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up and checking the tower. Every time I looked, the cabin was dark and still. The next day I continued my assessment, measuring stress points, checking the foundation anchors. Around noon I found something odd. There was a journal tucked behind the desk, wedged into a gap between the wall and the desk leg. It was recent, the pages weren't yellowed, and the pen clipped to it still worked. I flipped through it. It was a log kept by someone who'd been staying in the tower. The entries started in July and ran through September, just a few weeks before my arrival. Whoever wrote it had been living in the tower, not just visiting. They mentioned bringing supplies, rationing food, waiting. The entries got stranger as they went on. July 15, it's following the ridgeline again. Same pattern as yesterday. I can track its movement by watching the birds. August 3, heard it climbing last night. It got to about the third landing before it stopped. I don't think it can climb higher. The steel is too smooth. August 27, supply drop didn't come. I'm running low on everything, but I can't leave while it's still out there. It waits at the base every night. I can hear it pacing. The last entry was dated September 19. It knows I'm watching. It looked up at me today, right at the window where I stand. Its eyes are wrong. I can't describe how they're wrong, but once you see them, you understand everything. I'm going to try to leave tonight. If this journal is here and I'm not, tell my family I'm sorry. The entry ended there. No name, no signature. I stood in the cabin holding the journal, and my hands were shaking. I looked out the windows at the forest below, at the clear space around the tower base where I'd set up my tent, and I saw the prints. They circled the tower, pressed into the soft earth. Not quite tracks, more like drag marks, as if something had moved around the base, trailing parts of itself. The marks were fresh. They hadn't been there that morning. I climbed down immediately and packed my gear. I didn't care about finishing the assessment. I wanted out. But as I was stuffing my tent into my pack, I heard metal creaking above me. I looked up. Something was climbing the tower. I couldn't see it clearly. It was on the far side, moving up through the steel framework. But I could see sections of it between the structural beams, something pale and segmented, pulling itself up with appendages that were too long and thin to be arms. It moved fluidly, almost like a spider, ascending the tower faster than should have been possible. I ran. I left my tent, left half my gear, and ran for the trail. Behind me, I heard a sound like metal scraping metal, and then a long, low moan that might have been wind through the tower structure, or might have been something else. I hiked those 6 miles in record time, barely stopping, expecting any moment to hear that thing crashing through the forest behind me. When I finally reached my truck, I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked for 10 minutes, just breathing, before I felt safe enough to start the engine. I filed my report the next day. I said the tower was structurally unsound and recommended immediate dismantling. I didn't mention the journal or what I'd seen. Who would believe me? The service sent another team up there 2 weeks later. They reported the tower was in excellent condition and saw no reason to remove it. They found no journal, no strange tracks, no evidence anyone had been there recently except me. But they did find something in the cabin. Scratched into the wooden desk, fresh gouges in the wood. Tell NY family I'm sorry. I don't work for the Forest Service anymore. I took a desk job in Charleston, and I don't go into the woods if I can help it. Sometimes I think about that journal, about the person who wrote it. I wonder if they made it out, or if they're still out there somewhere. And sometimes, late at night, I think about what they wrote. Once you see them, you understand everything. I'm glad I never saw the eyes. I don't want to understand. Story 8. The mining company I worked for sent me to do a site assessment on an old coal operation near Beckley. The mine had been closed since the 70s, but the company owned the land and was considering reopening it if the coal seam was still viable. I was 35, had been doing mine assessments for about 8 years, and this was supposed to be routine. Go in, take core samples, check for structural integrity, assess the remaining coal deposits. 3 days, maybe 4. Solo job because budget was tight, and this was preliminary work. The mine entrance was on the side of a mountain, the opening partially collapsed but still accessible. The first 100 yards had been cleared by a previous survey team, with temporary supports installed. Beyond that, I was on my own. I set up base camp just inside the entrance, where I still had daylight visibility. The mine extended back into the mountain in a main tunnel, with several branch tunnels splitting off. According to the old maps, it went back about half a mile. The first day was straightforward. I worked my way along the main tunnel, taking measurements, marking walls with spray paint, collecting samples. The air was stale but breathable. My headlamp and flashlight cut through the darkness fine, nothing unusual. That night, camping just inside the entrance, I heard tapping. It was distant, coming from deep in the mine. Rhythmic, metallic. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Like someone hitting a pipe with a wrench. I told myself it was water dripping onto metal or rocks settling. Mines make noise, they're not static environments. The tapping continued for about an hour, then stopped. The second day I went deeper. About 400 yards in, I found something that wasn't on the old maps. A side tunnel, narrow, angling sharply downward. The entrance had been bricked up at some point, but the bricks had fallen away, leaving a gap just wide enough to crawl through. I should have ignored it. It wasn't part of my assessment, but I'm paid to be thorough, and if there was additional mine work that wasn't documented, the company needed to know. I squeezed through the gap and into the side tunnel. It dropped steeply, the walls narrowing until I had to move in a crouch. My headlamp showed rough-cut stone, much cruder than the main tunnel. This section looked older or less carefully excavated. About 30 yards down, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was maybe 20 feet across, with a ceiling so low I couldn't stand fully upright. And in the center of the chamber was a hole. Not a mine shaft, I'd seen plenty of those. This was different. Circular, about 4 feet across, perfectly vertical. The edges were smooth, almost polished. I couldn't see the bottom. I dropped a rock into it and counted. I got to 15 seconds before I heard it hit something. That meant it was at least 300 feet deep, maybe more. There were marks on the chamber walls. Scratched into the stone, crude but deliberate. Crosses and circles and symbols I didn't recognize. And next to the hole, arranged in a neat line, were miners' helmets. Old ones, probably from the 50s or 60s. 5 of them, lined up like someone had placed them there carefully. I photographed everything, my hands shaking slightly. This had to be reported. There was something about that hole that made my skin crawl, something wrong about the way the air moved around it, like there was a draft pulling downward. I was about to leave when I heard it, someone whistling from down in the hole, a tune I recognized. "You Are My Sunshine," my grandmother used to sing it. The whistling was faint but clear, echoing up from the depths. It continued for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped abruptly, cut off mid-phrase. I backed away from the hole, my heart pounding. I squeezed back through the gap into the main tunnel and walked quickly toward the entrance. I didn't run. Running in a mine is a good way to trip and crack your skull, but I moved fast. I didn't go back down that side tunnel. I spent the third day working near the entrance, taking samples I could have gotten on day 1, and I avoided looking at the darkness deeper in. But that night, the tapping came again. Louder this time and closer. It was coming from the main tunnel, moving toward me. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it down the tunnel. The beam reached maybe 50 yards, cutting through the darkness, and at the very edge of the light I saw something move, a figure, hunched over, moving in a shuffle. It wore what looked like old mining clothes, heavy canvas covered in coal dust. I couldn't see its face, but I could see that its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. It stopped at the edge of the light, just standing there, waiting. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice echoed strangely in the tunnel. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, swaying slightly. Then it raised one arm, that impossibly long arm, and pointed down the tunnel, deeper into the mine, toward the chamber with the hole. The tapping started again, but now I could see it wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from all around, from every tunnel and chamber, like dozens of things were hitting the walls and pipes and support beams all at once. The figure took a step forward into the light. I saw its face. It didn't have eyes. Just smooth skin where eyes should be, coal dust black, and a mouth that hung open, showing teeth filed to points. I ran. I grabbed my backpack and my lights, and I ran out of that mine, not caring about my equipment or my samples or anything else. I ran down the mountain to where I'd parked my truck, and I didn't stop until I was inside with the doors locked. I filed my report the next day. I said the mine was structurally unsound, but there was evidence of uncharted tunnels and potential cave-ins, and that I recommended against any further exploration. I didn't mention the chamber or the hole or what I'd seen. The company accepted my recommendation. The mine stayed closed. 2 months later, I was doing research for another job, and I came across something in the historical archives, a newspaper article from 1963 about a mining accident near Beckley. 5 miners had disappeared during a cave-in. The article said their bodies were never recovered. The article included the names of the missing miners, and it mentioned that one of them was known for whistling while he worked. His favorite song was "You Are My Sunshine." I quit the mining company after that. I work in an office now, doing environmental assessments from satellite data. I don't go underground anymore, but sometimes I dream about that hole in the chamber, about dropping a rock and never hearing it land, about what might be at the bottom, waiting in the dark. And I wake up with the sound of tapping in my ears, and I can't shake the feeling that something down there is still waiting for me to come back. Story 9. My girlfriend Samantha and I rented a cabin near Elkins for a week in February because we both needed to get away from work, and the rental was cheap in the off-season. The listing said it was secluded, which was exactly what we wanted. No neighbors, no noise, just woods and quiet. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The cabin was older than the photos suggested, but it was clean and the heat worked. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a main room with a stone fireplace. The back deck looked out over a steep hillside covered in bare trees. That first night was perfect. We made dinner, drank wine, sat by the fire. Around midnight, we were getting ready for bed when Samantha stopped in the bathroom doorway. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" "A child laughing, outside." I listened, nothing but wind. Probably just an animal. Foxes can sound weird. She nodded, but she looked uneasy. We went to bed. I woke up around 3 in the morning because Samantha was sitting up, staring at the window. The curtains were closed, but there was a faint light coming through, not moonlight, something more orange flickering. "There's a fire outside," she whispered. I got up and pulled the curtain aside. She was right. There was a fire burning in the woods about 50 yards from the cabin, small but bright, and standing around it were figures. People, I thought at first, but they weren't moving like people. They swayed in unison, like they were connected. "Should we call someone?" Samantha asked. "There's no cell service. We de-checked when we arrived. Maybe it's locals doing some kind of ritual." We watched for about 10 minutes. The fire burned steadily, never growing or shrinking. The figures kept swaying. Then, all at once, they stopped moving and turned to face the cabin. Even from that distance, I could feel them looking at us. Samantha pulled the curtain shut. "I don't like this." We didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn came, we went outside to look at where the fire had been. There was no burn mark, no charred wood, no sign anything had burned there at all. Just undisturbed leaves and normal forest floor. "We imagined it," I said, but I didn't believe that. Samantha wanted to leave. I convinced her to stay. We'd paid for the week, and it was daylight now. Everything seemed normal. We'd just been spooked by shadows and our imaginations. We spent the day hiking, trying to enjoy ourselves. But that night, the fire appeared again. Same location, same figures, and this time we heard the laughing children's voices, high and clear, coming from the woods. "We're leaving in the morning," Samantha said. "I don't care about the money." I agreed, but when morning came, my truck wouldn't start. The battery was dead, even though I'd driven it just the day before. And our phones were dead too, despite being plugged in all night. We were stuck. We spent the day trying to walk out. The driveway was about 3 miles long, according to the listing, and from there, it was another 5 miles to the main road. We made it maybe 2 miles before we realized we were lost. The driveway had somehow looped back on itself, and we were looking at the cabin again. "That's not possible," I said. We walked in a straight line. We tried again, same result. Every path led back to the cabin. As the sun set, Samantha started crying. "We're not supposed to leave. Whatever's out there, it wants us here." The fire appeared again that night, but closer, about 30 yards away now. The figures were clearer, children, maybe a dozen of them, holding hands in a circle around the fire. They wore old-fashioned clothes, like something from a century ago, and their faces were wrong. Too pale, features too sharp, eyes too large, they sang. A nursery rhyme I almost recognized, but the words were slightly off. "Ring around the hollow, pocket full of bones, ashes, ashes, they all stay home." Samantha was hyperventilating. I tried to calm her down, but I was just as terrified. Around midnight, someone knocked on the door. 3 soft knocks, like a child asking permission to enter. We didn't move. The knocking came again, more insistent. Then a voice, high and sweet, "Please let us in, we're cold." Samantha grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. We sat frozen on the couch, staring at the door. The knocking continued for hours, sometimes accompanied by voices, children begging to come inside, saying they were lost, saying their parents were looking for them. The voices were perfect, heartbreaking. If I hadn't seen those figures by the fire, I might have believed them. When dawn finally came, the knocking stopped. We tried the truck again. This time, miraculously, it started. We didn't pack, didn't clean up, just got in and drove. Driveway led out normally, no loops, no confusion. We got to the main road and kept driving until we were 3 counties away before we stopped. We never contacted the rental owner. I don't know if we'd been charged for the week or not. I deleted the app and blocked the emails. 2 weeks later, Samantha started having nightmares. She'd wake up crying, saying she could hear children singing. She went to a therapist, got medication for anxiety, but nothing helped. Last month she left me. She said she couldn't be around me anymore because whenever she looked at me, she thought about that cabin, and she couldn't handle it. I looked up the property after she left, trying to understand what had happened. The listing was gone. I did some more digging and found a reference to the land in historical records. In the 1890s, there had been a schoolhouse on that property. It burned down during Class 1 winter day. 12 children died in the fire. The record said the cause was never determined, but there were rumors the teacher had locked the doors from the outside. She was never found. I think about those children sometimes, about whether they're still out there, standing around that fire, singing their wrong nursery rhyme. And I think about how Samantha and I saw them, but we didn't let them in. I wonder what would have happened if we had. I'm glad I don't know. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.